Hey everybody, it's Josh from Triple Threat Artist. Today I'm going to talk about stems and the final files that you're going to need, or that I recommend that you have whenever you're finishing up a song. A lot of times people just bounce their final mix and maybe an instrumental mix, but I recommend that you actually do stems also, even if they're not immediately requested. It's great for archiving your song, and if there's ever a time where you need to go back and, several years later, 5-10 years later, redo a mix or something like that, having the stems is a great way to kind of save your place, especially when plugin manufacturers might, not keep their plugins updated, and opening old, DAW session files can be a big pain. So this is a great way to archive your session. So the very first thing that I do is I will pick my start point and my end point, and I will just do a bounce of a mix down of the final song. So this one is a song called "I'll Be Your Man," and it's kind of like a retro throwback, like Motown ballad. So I'll just play a little bit of it. Out for a hand. So I would just do a mix like that, and then I would just do another mix down where I've muted the vocals, so that just gives me the instrumental. And this song only has one vocal in it. If there was well, we'll get to that later, but for right now, just to make an instrumental, I would mute all the vocals. In this case, it's just one vocal track. So muting that would just give me my instrumental. What I was going to say a minute ago, if I did have multiple vocal tracks, when it comes time to do the stems, I would do a stem of just my lead vocal by itself. And then I would do a stem of my background vocals. So in my process, I've so far got a full mix of the song, I've got an instrumental mix. Then from here, I would start doing my stem. So the first thing that I do, I usually just work from the bottom of the session up. And the way that I usually lay out my sessions is I have kind of all of my pads or all of my kind of like background instruments down at the bottom. A lot of times my keyboards and stuff like that. So down here at the bottom, I've got strings, horns, and organ. So those three kind of play the same role. It's a lot of like long notes in this song. I'll just play a little bit of it, just soloing those three. So I've got organ. Then here comes the horn. And then over here, the horns will drop out and the strings will come in. So the reason that I'm playing this is I wanted you to hear that those are, even though they're three separate instruments, organ, horns, and strings, they're all kind of playing these long pad notes. And when I do stems, I think about these things. I think, in the future, am I going to ever need my organ all by itself if I ever needed to do like a remaster or a remix? Probably not. Would it be okay if if the horns and the organ were mixed into one stem? Probably. And is there ever going to be a time that, a music supervisor it's just going to break a deal if my organ and horns are mixed together in one stem? Probably not. If they want those kind of like background pads to be stemmed out, they're probably going to be okay with the organ and horns and the strings kind of being one bunch. In terms of like what you send to a music supervisor or like a film editor, you don't want to be giving them all 100 tracks of your session. You just want to be giving them the most simplified versions of what they're going to need, of the building blocks of your song. And in this case, I feel that the organ, horns, and strings could just be one stem. So that's what I would bounce down just like this. I would, again, go back to my start point and my end point, and then just have those three things soloed so that it makes one stereo file of organ, horns, and strings. And this brings up a good point. A lot of times people ask, when you do stems, do I start from the beginning of the session, or do I start from when that sound comes in? And the answer is always start all of your stems from the beginning of the session. The reason is that when the film editor asks for stems, they want to be able to line up all of your stems at the exact same start point and be able to make their own edits and things like that. They don't want to guess on where the horns were supposed to come in and then try and line it up. Start everything at the beginning of the session, even if there's silence for a good portion of it. So the next thing that I would do is, I've got piano here. The way that we recorded this piano is we had just like kind of the rhythm chords, and then we did a separate track where the piano player just improvised a couple of little riffs over it. So you'll hear that here. Let's see, I'll play this section right here. So it wasn't necessary to do it that way, but I kind of liked having that option when it was time to mix, in terms of being able to raise or lower those little riffs. And then again, when we did the solo section, that's also part of this kind of riffs track here. So that's just kind of the rhythm chords. And so the reason that I'm showing you this is that I'm going to bounce these pianos as one track, because really the intention was for it to sound like one piano player. We did it separately, again, for mixing reasons, so that I would have a little bit more control over some of those cool riffs that he was playing. So that's what I'm going to do. I would bounce these two pianos as one piano stem, and yeah, and then I would have that. The one instrument that I almost always bounce by itself is the bass guitar. Because bass frequencies can get so muddy when you start adding other things to them, I usually just have the bass guitar by itself. And you know, that's just kind of like a safe bet if you ever need to remix something in the future. So I do that for the bass guitar, and then I come up here, and here's my vocal. I would do a vocal stem, just the lead vocal, like I was talking about. And if I had any background vocals, I would do those as separate stems. If I had like background oohs, where there wasn't any like lyrics to it, it was just like vocal pads, I would bounce those separately. And if I had vocal harmonies, you know, like a triple track of harmonies that were happening, I would bounce those separately as a stem. So I would have lead vocal by itself, I would have any vocal harmonies that are singing lyrics as a stem, and then any vocal pads like oohs or ahs and things like that as its own separate stem. And then the last thing here is my drums. And this one doesn't have any percussion, it's just a single drum set. If I did have shaker or tambourine, it depends on whether I would include the tambourine and shaker in with the drum set. It just depends on how loud it is. If it's like really like a support instrument, if it blends really well with the drums and it sounds like it's part of that mix, then, you know, then I might. If I had like tambourine, shaker, you know, maybe something else in the percussion family, congas or something like that, I would probably bounce those just as a percussion stem and then do my drum set as its own separate stem. And have them as two separate things. There's really no concrete rules to how you do stems. It's really just logically, you have to think about two things. You have to think about what is going to be asked of you from a music supervisor or a film editor or TV editor in terms of like what stems they might want and how to make their job easier for them. And then the second thing that you have to ask yourself is, if, you know, in my case, my DAW is Pro Tools. If Pro Tools vanishes in 3 years and I need to rebuild this mix from scratch, and, you know, all of a sudden the song becomes a hit and I need to remix it or whatever, what files am I going to need to be able to do that, to not have to like re-record this song from scratch? So those are the kind of two things that I'm thinking about. Here's a bonus tip that a lot of people don't do when they're bouncing down stems and bouncing down their final mixes. Think about alternate versions of the song that you could get for free, basically, from your tracks. And here's an example with this song. If I solo my vocal and I solo my pianos, listen to how this song sounds now.
The night's feeling lonely and you reach out for a hand.
Now, with no extra work, pretty much, I've got a vocal piano ballad with no other instruments. This would work perfect for, like, you know, a lot of times I'll get requests for like hotel lobby music where it's just like a piano singer, you know, something really minimal. So this is like a bonus version of this song that I have without having to re-record it or anything like that. To be honest, I would probably remix the piano a little bit. I had cut off a bit of the low end in the piano to make room for the upright bass, but you get my point. Without much more work, you could have other versions of the same song. It can be very lucrative to have those other versions to be able to offer those. Yeah, so I think that's it. One last thing, when I do bounce these down, I personally bounce them down as 24-bit 48K file versions, file formats. If you Google this on the internet, you're going to get a million people. There's no industry standard on this. I started out with 2448 because at the time I had heard that Blu-ray DVD audio was 2448. I've since learned that that also has no standard, and there's audio in all kinds of formats out there. And then the other thing that I do with this is I use AIF. And the reason that I do that is because AIF, well, this won't let me do AIF with MP3. AIF will let you embed metadata much more easily than WAV files will. All right, so I think those are all of my tips for this. Hopefully this helped. Have a great day.